A Golden God frontman, killer riffs, thunderous drums, iconic songs, and a well-crafted mystique. How Led Zeppelin became the biggest band in the world, next.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. My guest is Denny Somach. He is the author of Get the Lead Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World, the updated edition. Denny, how you doing?
Okay.
I want to set this up with a brief bio on what I found on you here. You tell me if everything is correct. Your production company is one of the most successful independent producers of syndicated and network rock radio programming in the U.S. You are on air with Rock and Roll for Grownups at NEWHD Radio. Also, the Rock Podcast with Denny Somach, available in video on YouTube and audio on all popular platforms. You have worked with Yes, Alan Parsons, Dave Mason, Johnny Winter, Asia, Dickie Betts, Todd Rundgren, among others. And you are the executive producer of Eric Johnson's Avia Musicom, which features the Grammy Award-winning song Cliffs of Dover. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did. Glad to be here. I hear your show is a real perfect outlet for this type of thing.
Absolutely, man. And I always love talking Led Zeppelin. And as we are now finding out that there are younger generations discovering Zeppelin, which is always great.
It's the music, number one. Number two, it's the fact that there's a great singer, Robert Plant. But the real reason is Jimmy Page. He's a master of the studio. He was a session musician, which means people used to hire him to play guitar. He's on over 1,000 records, everything from the Goldfinger theme song to several Who records, Kinks records, Van Morrison records, Donovan. He's on Joe Cocker's With a Little Help from My Friends. He just learned the studio inside and out better than anybody. So when it came time to record, he was an expert. And that's why he produced all the records. And that's really the main thing. He was a great producer, great musician. He found 3 other great musicians, and the music is incredible, and it just keeps rolling over generation after generation. Still the biggest band in the world.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into the history of Zeppelin, and it comes from this book, which is based on the original version, came out in 2012, right? Is that the...
Correct.
Okay.
And since then, that sold out, did very well. And my publisher said, Zeppelin is still the biggest band in the world. And I said, yeah, in fact, there's a documentary coming out called Being Led Zeppelin or Becoming Led Zeppelin. I said, maybe we should put the book out again. And she said, well, my editor, what can you add to it? And I wanted to do a different type of book, by the way, just so you know. This is not a book that says Robert Plant was born on such and such a date and he went to school here. There's tons of Zeppelin books that give you the background. What I wanted was the information that the other people who have played with them, opened for them, worked with them, observed them, what their stories are, because that's really what the essence is of Zeppelin. It's the magic of all the other people that they worked with and how the music came about and everything. It doesn't matter where they were born or where they lived. There's 100 books that tell you that. So,
and it's based on Kara Miller's radio show?
Well, originally, I created that show a long time ago, and then I got Carol to host it, and I produced it for 5 years. And there's like a local version across the country. A lot of stations do a Get the Lead Out. It's usually 3 songs by Led Zeppelin in the evenings. But I said to the editor, I said, why don't I just take the best of, there's like 10 or 12 really good interviews in here in the original, and I'll add 200 and some pages. I'll get new interviews. I'll talk to new people, people that I've been trying to get the first time around, and get stories that haven't been told. And that's basically what this book is. Stories about Led Zeppelin that have not previously been in other books. And that meant tracking down people who had some sort of interaction with them, but their stories were never recorded. Or they were recorded, but nobody really found them.
Yeah, one story I'm not sure if it's ever been told, but it's regarding John Bonham joining the band. Jimmy Page was putting together a new version of the Yardbirds, band he'd been with for a few years. This is back in '68, and he brought in John Paul Jones, a fellow veteran of London studio session work. Jimmy saw Robert Plant perform. Robert was on board right away, but Bonham's wife didn't want him to join the band.
Right, because he was playing drums for a guy named Tim Rose. I don't know if you know who he is, but
Yeah.
he's a folk singer that I believe he claims, along with other people, to have written Hey Joe
Yeah.
and Morning Dew. So who knows? But he was a folk singer. He was around a long time, and he was Bonham was his drummer, and he was making 150 pounds a week. He didn't want to give up that job. So actually, when Jimmy went to see Robert, Bonham was playing with him that day. And Chris Strea from the Yardbirds bass player, went along with Jimmy and the manager, Peter Grant. And Jimmy initially said, this is from Chris, told me this. He said, well, I like the singer. I'm not sure, but I'll audition him at my house. But that drummer, he's a must. He knew right away, Bonham. And that's why the basic sound of Zeppelin is all draped around the drums. It all comes from the drums. That's why they couldn't continue once he passed away.
Yep.
You couldn't go out and get Kenny Jones, or the only guy that might have been able to replace him would have been Carmine Appice, a heavy drummer, or the drummer Beb Bevan, who was in a band called The Move, a very heavy drummer. But other than that, there aren't too many people that I think could even come close. And since Carmine was John Bonham's mentor, you can see where John Bonham got a lot of his moves from.
Great forward from Carmine.
Yeah.
Like he says, I've been there. I was there from the beginning right up until the end when Bonham passed.
Yeah, I mean, Vanilla Fudge were out on tour. They were a big band then. They were headlining. Middle act was a band called Spirit. And the promoter said, listen, we're going to put this band Led Zeppelin on as the opener. And Carmine and the rest of the band said, well, we don't need them. We're already sold out. What's the point? He says, well, you got to put them on. And not only that, they got to make $1,500 and you have to pay $750 of it. And I'll pay the other $750. And they said, what? So they ended up being the opening act on that first tour, which started right after Christmas. And within 3 or 4 weeks, the band did a 2-week tour, and then they went off and did like the Whiskey A Go Go and the Fillmore, and that was the end of the first American tour. When they came back to do the second American tour, the album had taken off to the point where it was Vanilla Fudge and Led Zeppelin, equal billing. And then 6 months after that, when they came back, it was Led Zeppelin, opening act, Vanilla Fudge.
Yeah.
So that's how fast it happened. And Carmine said, nobody knew what they sounded like. We said, okay, well, send us a test pressing of the record so we can hear it. So he was actually the first person to ever hear the band because he got a test pressing. And, obviously, since they opened for him, he was the first person to see them play live. And he is the only musician that has ever said to me, Led Zeppelin, they blew us off the stage.
Wow.
So, very few people would admit that. But
No.
he said these guys were just so good. I mean, we were good. We were very popular, but these guys were amazing. Once they got into a rhythm and started, the second album, they just exploded.
The story about Bonham but his wife thought that the band was too dangerous. Like he thought these guys were going to be trouble. This is a story. I think it was in the documentary film, but
yeah. Well, it was really Pat, his wife, said, I don't want you hanging around with Robert Plant. He's always getting into trouble.
Yeah.
And you're going to get into trouble if you hang out with him. And they'd been in several bands together, Obs Tweedle and some other bands. And like I said, he didn't want to give up a gig, 150 pounds a week at that time, playing with a major known person was a big deal. And they had to send him several telegrams to tell him they wanted him in the band, and he thought it was a joke. So finally, Peter Grant had to send somebody in person to his house and tell him Jimmy Page would like to meet with you. He wants you to be in the new Yardbirds, which is what they were called at the time.
Imagine if he did not go.
Same thing with Plant. He got a call and he thought someone was playing a joke on him. So then they sent a telegram and he ignored it. And then finally, somebody had to go deliver the message to him in person.
They recorded the first album, the self-titled debut, but still performing under the name The Yardbirds.
The New Yardbirds. And the reason for that is they had split up in the summer of 68. And the Yardbirds had a tour of Scandinavia that was booked, and they couldn't get out of it. They would have been sued. They would have, whatever. It was a short tour. So the manager said, you know what? We'll call the band the New Yardbirds so we can fulfill that thing, and then you can change the name. The other thing that happened, which was interesting, when they first played in Denmark, Lady von Hindenburg, whose husband, the Hindenburg, was named after, the balloon, said to them, if you use the name Led Zeppelin, I'm going to sue you. So for two reasons, they couldn't call themselves Led Zeppelin. So they were the New Yardbirds. As soon as they got back to to England, to play the different clubs, they were billed as the Yardbirds had a good following. They had a number of hits, For Your Love and Over, Under, Sideways, Down. So they had drawing power. So they were labeled Led Zeppelin, formerly the Yardbirds, or the New Yardbirds, now Led Zeppelin. And after a few weeks, it stuck.
You write about how the year 1969 marked another watershed period for the group's history. And you write in the book, quote, it was during 1969 that the band created the memories that would compel them to continue their association for longer than a decade. Take us through that year. It starts with the release of the debut album, but they're also writing and recording music for the second album during much of that year.
Yeah, well, first of all, Jimmy had most of the stuff he wanted on the first album. And when they went into rehearsals before the Scandinavian tour, he said, look, we're just going to do these new songs that I want to do on our first album. So that's what they played, the first album. And they put in For Your Love and one other song so they could keep the Yardbirds' identity. But basically, after that tour, Jimmy went into the studio. He didn't wait to get a record deal. Put the money up himself. It was £1,700. He still has the receipts. And he said, look, we're going in the studio and we're going to do our live act that we've just been doing for 3 weeks. And that's going to be our album. And that's how the album got recorded in 2 weeks. And they were so well rehearsed. That's how it came out to be the way it did. Okay, so they come out with that. It's different than most anything else happening at the time. It's very blues-oriented rock. Now, English blues bands were big, Savoy Brown and John Mayall and Fleetwood Mac. There was a lot of the blues bands, but they were doing it like psychedelic blues, and that was the difference. So they, since they'd already had the first album and it was done, it came out in January. They were writing the second album all during that year of 69. And by the end of the year, and they were recording it along the way while they did 6 tours the first year.
Wow.
3-week tours, but 6 tours. It's phenomenal. And one of the reasons that they really didn't play that much in their home area of England, because Peter Grant had noticed, and Jimmy noticed, because the Yardbirds used to play the American colleges and stuff, that in America, we have colleges everywhere that all have auditoriums that hold 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. In England, they don't have that. In fact, if you look at Beatlemania, did not exist in Britain because the biggest place the Beatles ever played was the Royal Albert Hall, which holds 3,000 people. There were no stadiums that you could play in. There were no big halls. So the frenzy of Beatlemania happened in America and then spilled back into England. So Jimmy and Peter Grant, who had managed a band called the New Vaudeville band and had been a road manager for Jerry Lee Lewis and some other people. They understood the American market, that there was a place to play where you didn't have to have 25 hits and you just played colleges, and 2, 3, 4,000 seaters. So they saw that was the future. Let's play those. We'll still do the Fillmores and the other places, but we're just going to play these colleges, which is what they did, and that's how they built up their following.
Get every episode of Booked on Rock commercial free by grabbing a Backstage Pass on Patreon. It's just $5 a month and a great way to support the show. Check the show notes for the link or visit bookedonrock.com to sign up. I want to talk about the importance of Peter Grant. He had a game plan and he really helped to build up the mystique of the band. Like he didn't want cameras there. Where did they meet him? You mentioned he was.
Okay, well, he was when the Yardbirds' last manager, I can't remember his, Simon Napier Bell, I believe it was.
Oh yeah, I had him on the show.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, he's put out some books.
Yeah. He was the last manager of the Yardbirds, and he didn't want to do anything anymore in the last couple of months. So he was working out of Peter Grant's office, and they were all working with Mickey Most, who was a known producer. And he just said to Peter Grant, listen, why don't you just take over management of the Yardbirds? I don't know how much longer they're going to stay together, but they're a hit band and you know the ropes and everything. And Grant was a gangster to some extent. He had also been a wrestler. He was a movie stunt double, and he was a tough looking guy, but he wouldn't take crap from anybody. So Zeppelin always got paid. Everything that Jimmy wanted to do, Grant was able to do. So one of the things that they talked about was, I don't want to release any singles, because if you buy the single, you're not going to buy the album. That was number one. Now in England, it's different than it is here. They allowed Whole Lotta Love to come out as a single, because here you put out a single and it's included on the album. In England, you put out a single, it's not on the album. Like Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane was part of Sgt. Pepper, but it came out as a single.
Right.
That's why it's not on Sgt. Pepper. So the two things that Grant said is, we're not going to do that, and we're not going to allow television. We're not going to do any TV shows. The other thing is, if we do singles in England and they become number one because of the way the English unions and the musicians, if you get a number one song in England, you must go and do Top of the Pops, which was their countdown show. And they didn't want to piss off the government. So they said, if we don't have a number one song, we don't have to go on Top of the Pops. So one of the best stories in the book is a guy named Bill Harry, who had been the editor of the Liverpool Echo, and he was always championing the Beatles, and he ended up doing PR for the Beatles. Now, when the Beatles left Liverpool, he decided to move to London, and everybody wanted him to be their PR guy because he'd been the PR guy for the Beatles. So he was doing Procol Harum and all these other bands. So Peter Grant calls him up and said, Bill, I want you to come to my office and have a meeting. So Bill thought, okay, he's going to hire me to be their PR. That'd be great. So Bill goes to the meeting, and Peter Grant says, okay, here's your job. Your job is to keep the press away. And Bill Harry goes, what? No press? No press. It's your job to see that nobody interviews him and nobody gets close to him. And he was like flabbergasted. But that was his job, to keep the press away. And he talks about it in the book. Fascinating story. One of the best stories I've ever heard.
Is he looking to also make it so when Zeppelin comes to town, it's a big deal because they're not overexposed?
Right. See, yeah, he thought if people saw them live, if people saw them on TV, they wouldn't go see them live.
Yeah.
Which is, it's usually the other way around. People see you on TV and then they'll go see you live, but it can go either way. But this way, they controlled everything, the releases. And when Jimmy signed the record deal with Atlantic, in the contract, he got things that nobody ever got. Number one, nobody from the record company is ever allowed to come to the studio. Number two, We decide the covers of the album. Number three, no singles. Number four, no TV. And Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler, who signed them, were like, well, okay. And they got the biggest deal at the time. They got an advance. And here's how it came out. $135,000 advance, which that's like 2 million today
Right.
for an unknown band. But Wexler knew Jimmy Page, knew who he was, a virtuoso is what he called. And he said, anytime there's a virtuoso in a band, they always look for other virtuosos to play with. So we're not taking that much of a gamble. We're going to sign him. And we know Jimmy's reputation, so we're going to give him that. Now, they had said, we're going to give you 200 grand. I got 135,000, which we're going to put up for North America. And Wexler said, I'll get the other 65,000 from one of our licensees overseas. And he went out and nobody wanted to give him the 65,000 to make the deal. So finally, after figuring something out, they took money from this and that. They got the 200,000, and that's how the band got the $200,000 deal. And that was for 6 records.
You wonder where they would have been without Peter Grant, just as much as you could say
absolutely.
the same for all the members of the band. He was a guy you didn't mess with. You said that. Do you remember the story? We could look through the book if you need, but from 77 in Oakland, there was,
what happened was Peter Grant's son, I think his name was Mark. He was in his mid-teens. He saw a poster, Day on the Green, Zeppelin, and he went over and he picked it up and said, I want to keep this as a souvenir. Well, Bill Graham his people got furious and they said, put that back. You can't just take that. And then they called Bill Graham over, and that's what started the fight. And then they ended up going to jail overnight.
Right.
And because Grant said, wait a minute, my son wants that poster, and you're going to tell him no? We'll never play for you again, ever. And they're the biggest band in the world. What's Bill Graham going to do? Say, well, I can book anybody, but I can never get Led Zeppelin? So they resolved it.
And if I remember correctly, things got a bit physical too. I think Peter Grant
did. They got
somebody up.
Yeah, Graham's people a couple of them got arrested, and a couple of the Zeppelin road people got arrested, and they went to jail overnight. But no big deal.
That was the kind of thing with Peter Grant. You just, he was the guy in charge. He protected the band, and you didn't.
Whenever he would see catch someone taping a show, he would go over and he wouldn't just say, you can't do that. He would destroy the tape machine and throw the people out. He also would go outside to see who was selling bootleg shirts and stuff, and he would confiscate everything. So he knew what was going on, and nothing got by him.
No. Zeppelin 2 was huge. Whole Lot of Love, top 10 single. 1970 starts as a continuation of what was begun late 1969. And to give you an idea of how busy this band was, here's what you write in the book, Denny. You say, quote, by the summer, a third album was being prepared and was soon released, signaling a new direction for the band. By the end of the year, a fourth album was already being prepared.
Right.
At what point did Zeppelin go from supporting act to headlining the bigger venues?
Summer of the first year, summer of 69. They became a headliner in Chicago at the Electric Circus, I believe. And then they headlined the Fillmore, but those weren't huge places. It was when they started playing the stadiums and selling them out with no press other than the announcement they were coming, which also Peter Grant changed the dynamics of how promoters promoted shows. Usually, promoter would offer a band a certain amount of money to play a show as stadium, 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever. Peter Grant said, no. We get 85% of what the money is. You get 15, because you don't have to do anything. You don't even have to pay for advertising. We're going to sell out just by mentioning we're coming. And he was right. And that changed the dynamics of the music business. So promoters could never make more than 15%, but they also knew that they were going to sell out and make some money. So that, but everybody started doing that. When Bill Graham started to do it with Santana after that, and then it became a norm with big bands.
And sadly, Peter Grant died fairly young, right? He was maybe in his 50s.
Yeah, it was, but he was a heavy smoker. He was overweight. He had some heart problems. Um, so, it's not unexpected, but yeah, yeah, died in his late 50s, I think.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. Denny Somach, the author of Get the Lead Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World. The updated edition is out now. So just as the third album was picking up steam at the start of 71, the band are working on the fourth album. February 14th, Disc and Music announced Led Zeppelin was the top group in the world as chosen by readers' votes.
They beat the Beatles out that year.
It's a perfect storm of amazing music, electrifying live performances. The press is now giving the band major coverage, but also, there was that mystique, as we talked about.
Press was giving him coverage, but they couldn't talk to anybody.
Right.
The first guy to get to him was Cameron Crowe, who is a director today and wrote Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and he was he wrote reviews for papers in San Diego, and he somehow got to be a stringer at Rolling Stone when he was 15. He said, "I'm going to get an interview with Led Zeppelin." And Ben Functor said, "Yeah, okay, sure. Go ahead." And he went out and actually was able to go on tour with them and got an interview with the band. And it was the first cover of Rolling Stone that Zeppelin ever appeared on.
Yeah, he's quoted in the book, Cameron Crowe, right?
Yep.
And he just put a book out recently. I'd love to have him on.
Yeah, it's a great book,
that.
by the way. He tells that story, but it's a great book. He's also the only guy. You never hear Zeppelin. Well, nowadays you do every now and then, but you never heard Zeppelin songs in any movies because they would never license it.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
When Cameron made, can't remember the name of his book now.
Almost Famous is the film.
Yeah, Almost Famous. He went out and asked the band if he could license some music, and they granted him permission.
Yes, That's the Way, and maybe another one.
Yeah, I don't remember, but other than that, and I remember the director who did the movie Dazed and Confused. There was a movie, nothing to do with the band. I can't remember. He's a well-known director. And he tried to license Dazed and Confused for the title track for the movie. They wouldn't license it to him, and he offered him everything. And he said, "Nope, we don't license our music to films." And he was so pissed because he'd named the movie thinking that he was going to get the rights to license the song.
There's a story in the book I don't think I ever heard before. It has to do with Bon Scott of AC/DC telling Jimmy Page and Robert Plant to get lost. Right? Could you tell the story of what happened February 18th, 1972?
Well, they were competition because AC/DC were a loud band and they were a big band. And Bon Scott was always coming out in the polls, as either the top singer until Robert Plant started doing it. And he was trying to annoy them. So whenever he could, he annoyed them by saying things to him like that would get him upset.
Yeah, they wanted to stop and see a show. And I think too, he didn't realize who it was. I think after the fact, he's like, "Oh, wait a minute. That was the guys from Led Zeppelin."
Yeah. A lot of people, because no one ever saw them on TV. Nobody knew what they looked like. Most people didn't even know their names of the guys in the band. In fact, that's what I tell people. They go, "Well, what makes you qualified to write a Led Zeppelin book?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you something. There's about 100 books on Led Zeppelin. Most of those books are written by people who weren't born when the band came out, never saw them live. I checked all the boxes. I was born before they came out. I saw them live. I knew their music because I was a DJ and I played it. and I was more familiar with them and all the people around them than most anybody else. So that's why this book stands out, because you'll find stuff in here. It's not that other people didn't, they just didn't know it, because, you know, it was very hard to find these details out. But I dug, like there's an interview in here with Nicky Hopkins, who was a well-known session musician. In fact, he just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last year as the, you know, not as a special mention nominee, because he played keyboards for Jefferson Airplane, Jeff Beck,
The
Stones,
Stones, yeah.
Beatles, everybody. He was the most successful. There's a documentary that just came out, by the way. And Jimmy originally went to Nicky, this is in the book, and he said, "We'd like you to play piano with Zeppelin." And Nicky said, no, he said, "I want you to play piano in my new band." And Nicky said to Jimmy Page, "Are you kidding? I don't want to be in the Yardbirds, the new Yardbirds. That's ridiculous. I'm going to go. I got an offer from Jeff Beck. I'm going to go play with him." And then he goes, "Biggest mistake I ever made."
Yeah. Yeah.
Because remember, you know, they were called the new Yardbirds. Nobody knew what they were. It's the same thing when they tried to get Terry Reid as the singer, and also Steve Marriott of the Small Faces.
Yeah.
And Terry Reid had just gotten a solo deal and had the shot to open for the Stones in America. So he said, you know, between that and joining the Yardbirds, which didn't mean much in England,
Right.
because their hits were in America. They put out albums. Some of their albums didn't even come out in England. They were a good band. They played live and all that. But the whole thing about Zeppelin, it's based on the Yardbirds. And the Yardbirds, which I point out to people, are behind the Beatles and the Stones, the most important British act ever. Main reason, 3 guitar players in that band: Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, all went through the Yardbirds. So, you know, that's why they're the third on the list. Nobody else can come close. I tell that to people and they go, "Oh, yeah, I could see that. All 3 of those guys." I said they were all in the Yardbirds.
Yeah. And when Beck and Page were there together, they didn't get along all that well, I don't think, right?
Well, they got along, but Jeff didn't like the idea of another guitar player. So they had been friends since high school. But in fact, Jeff invited Jimmy to join on bass when Paul Samuel Smith quit. He was the bass player. And Jimmy joined on bass for 9 months before Chris Drea took over the bass, and Jimmy and Jeff were the 2 leads, and they recorded one of the most unbelievable psychedelic singles of all time, Happenings 10 Years Time Ago, which is where they do a twin lead fighting off type thing. And it gets voted most unique single ever to come out of England.
Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes, on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. You mentioned how the band was built around the drums.
Yeah.
And there's something, you interviewed Ron Nevison, who was part of, he was on hand with Ronnie Lane's
Physical Graffiti.
for Physical Graffiti.
Yeah, the reason is the band said, "We want to go to this place, Headley Grange," which was like an old warehouse an hour outside of London. But what are we going to do to record? And Ron Nevison had built both the Small Faces and the Stones had a mobile studios that they could take around. So he was able to get, I think it was the Stones mobile. And that's how he became the engineer on the record. He had the Stones mobile. He brought it to Headley Grange. and they recorded, physical graffiti.
Yeah, and he said something about Bonham playing just from the guitar.
Yeah, he says the only guy he's ever seen that took his cues. He played to Jimmy's whatever Jimmy was playing. He played to that, and he said, and Ron Nevison has produced everybody from Dave Mason to Hart to Bad Company to everybody. He's a very well-known producer. He said, and he's an American too. I never noticed that until I saw Zeppelin play. And he said that's why the chemistry was so unbelievable because they did things that never really happened before, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that Jimmy was so experienced in the studio. He never listed anybody as a co-producer on any of the albums. Sometimes he didn't even put the engineer down, but Ron got mentioned. It was basically Eddie Kramer and Ron Neverson were the two engineers that worked with Zeppelin most of the time.
The late night improvisations, that would lead to things, they would just jam.
Yeah. And I forget the song, but Nevison, it's in his interview. He said they were recording, sometimes they would record outside. And at one point, I forget the name of the song, a jet flew over.
Oh, yeah.
And he said they left it in. So if you listen carefully to the song, you can hear it.
I'm blanking too, but yeah, you can hear Robert Plant say, "No, leave it."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's off of Zeppelin 3.
Yeah.
75 to 79, Zeppelin were at their commercial peak. And
yeah, it was 77 is what really did it. They did 5 nights at Madison Square Garden, all sold out in a matter of hours.
Around that point, though, they're starting to fracture a little bit.
John Paul Jones was getting a little tired of being on the road. And his wife said, so he was considering leaving the band. And he was an arranger and he worked with Jimmy a lot in as studio sessions. But Peter Grant convinced him not to quit. And so he stayed with the band. But that was the only time there was any problem.
And then Plant the personal tragedies.
Yeah. When his son, losing his son, breaking his leg. I mean, he sang the lead parts on Presence while he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Presence is an interesting album. That's the album really that Jimmy kind of took over.
Yeah, they were, these guys they were so happy to be in this band to watch Jimmy as a producer because they'd never seen the tricks that he did, backward tapes and loops, and the engineers he was working with never saw these things before. When they were doing the first album, Glyn Johns was the engineer. Glyn Johns worked with the Beatles. And Jimmy said, well, I want you to, cut this piece of tape out and put it at the end and reverse it. And Glyn Johns said, what? He said, no, just do it. And that's how they got the sound on, I forget what song it was.
On the breakdown to Whole Lot of Love.
Yeah.
When you hear, it's like you hear Robert's voice kind of foreshadowing what's to come.
Actually, the Whole Lot of Love, like several Zeppelin songs, was stolen from the Small Faces. They had a song based on Muddy Waters' Willie Dixon written song called You Need Love. Except the Small Faces did it as You Need Love, and they did it just like Plant does it. Woman, you need. And Plant was a huge fan of the Small Faces. So he saw that. When it got time for them to record Whole Lot of Love, that's where he got that from. Because if you go to the Small Faces' first album and play You Need Love, you'll flip out. They stole a lot of songs. And as you all know, finally came to a crescendo about 15 years ago when they got sued for the intro to Stairway to Heaven by a band called Spirit. Now, Spirit was the middle act, so Zeppelin was big fans of Spirit. They actually, on the Live at the BBC, they do a medley of 2 Spirit songs within another song. So they were huge fans of Spirit. They knew the first album, which had the song Taurus on it. If you play the intro to Taurus, it is identical to the intro to Stairway to Heaven. But I'm surmising this. I think a lot of people were upset when they thought that Zeppelin stole their song. But as several of those people who I interviewed, like Jake Holmes, who's in the book, he wrote Dazed and Confused. And he actually was an opening act for the Yardbirds in '68, where they saw him do it. They immediately ran down to the Village in New York to Bleecker Bob's and bought Jake Holmes's album and said, you know, we could really do a number with this. But they didn't give credit to Jake Holmes. So anyway, I think that what happened was when people complained and said, oh, we're, you know, to their managers or whoever, everybody probably said, you can't sue Led Zeppelin. It's too expensive. It's just going to go on forever. It'll never get resolved. And that's really the reason why they never. I mean, I remember I was interviewing Jake Holmes, and he didn't even know they stole the song from him because he had a couple of albums out, and then he quit the music business to go into the jingle business. He wrote I'm a Pepper, You're a Pepper, the Dr. Pepper thing, and he wrote Be All You Can Be for the Army.
Yep.
So when I was interviewing him, I said to him, I said, well, how come you never didn't? He said, well, my kids told me about it, but you know, I didn't even know. I thought you could take any song and just change it around, and that was okay. And I said to him, no. As soon as I got done with the interview, he got a lawyer on the phone, and he
Wow.
got a settlement. And now the credits have all been changed on the first album. There's a woman named Anne Breeden, who wrote Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which Jimmy got from a Joan Baez album. And the Joan Baez album said traditional, arranged Joan Baez. She didn't know where it came from. But what happened was this woman is still around. She wasn't really playing that much anymore. She was a folk singer. And one day her 15-year-old son came in, heard her playing, and he said, Mom, why are you playing a Zeppelin song? And she said, Zeppelin song? Babe, I wrote that song in 1958. Are you kidding me? And he had to go get the album and show her. And of course, she pursued it, and her name now appears in the credits too.
Wow. Do you feel that affects the legacy of the band in a negative way, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my feeling is that everybody steals from everybody. Zeppelin could easily have given credit and paid something because they stole most of the stuff from these black blues guys who really could have used the money. I mean, Willie Dixon sued. His daughters were driving around Chicago in 1974. The first time they heard Whole Lotta Love on the radio. And they said, wait a minute, our father wrote that. And they went and they pursued a case and they won. Howlin' Wolf wrote a song called, which the Lemon Song was a song by him. I forget what he called it. How Many More Times was really a Howlin' Wolf song called How Many More Years. So they could have easily given credit and paid royalties. Even if they rearranged it, they could still put their name on it. But, you know, like I said, the managers, fuck them.
Well, I was about to say, was that more of a Peter Grant decision than the band?
Yeah, because they said, what should we do? You know, I mean, Jimmy, I'm sure knew that in most cases he picked it up from somewhere. But who knew if he did or not? But the case with Spirit, they had the opportunity. They were fans of the band. They saw him play live. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, You Shook Me, which was on a Muddy Waters EP, which both he and Jeff Beck had, Jimmy and Jeff Beck, which is why it's on the first Jeff Beck album also. Whereas Jeff Beck accused Jimmy of stealing it from his album.
Zeppelin's a big target. You know, they're a huge band too. So it happens a lot. But when it happens to them,
generally, you figure they're going to settle because they don't want to. And Zeppelin was so rich that they would just, if it got to a point, they would either just continue to sue until the other side was exhausted, and then they'd make a settlement. That's what they did. Because, you know, every album was a platinum, double platinum, triple platinum. Every tour was sold out. You know, they were selling out Tampa Stadium in the early 70s. 75,000 people, bigger than the Beatles at Shea Stadium.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. There was that one point there where they went into hiatus because of the death of Robert's son Carrick in July of 77, but they came back in 79 with In Through the Outdoor, and
Right.
they go on the tour of Europe, and there's plans for a major North American tour, and
Yep.
everything's looking good as we get into the 1980s, right? We get to September of 1980, John Bonham's death. Now,
I had tickets 3 weeks before the tour was to start.
Which
Bonham
show?
died. Philadelphia. I think it was the Spectrum. It was like the fourth or fifth show on the list. Now, one of the best stories is Simon Kirke, the drummer from Bad Company, who were on Swan Song, the same label as Zeppelin, and they were a huge band, obviously. Simon was in England, and he gets a call. He calls Peter Grant, who's also managing Bad Company. And he said, look, the Bad Company tour isn't going to start for another 6 months. We just finished the record. I'm really bored. Peter Grant said, well, get on a plane, come over to Germany, and see a few Zeppelin shows. So he goes over to Germany. And the last 2 dates were in Germany. I forget the cities. And the night before the final date, Bonham said to him, he'd been there for like a week. Bonham said, hey, would you like to play Whole Lotta Love with me on stage? And Simon Kirke said, are you kidding? No one's ever played with you. Absolutely. He said, good. We'll rehearse tomorrow. So Simon thinks, okay, I'm going to go to a studio. There'll be 2 sets of drums and we'll do a rehearsal. And he comes the next day and he goes, okay, where are we going to rehearse? And Bonham goes, right here in my room, on my bed. You use your hands. This is how it goes. And he showed him the song by using his hands, by hitting the bed. Simon was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And he went out and he played Whole Lotta Love with them. And then the next day was the final date. So he was the last person to really see them play. And his interview was excellent.
The night before John Bonham died, this is September 24th of 1980, the band did get together, first day of rehearsals, and it seems to start out great. John Paul Jones described it as a day of rejuvenation. Talk about how that day went. Bonham was drinking throughout the day.
He was drinking. He had enough alcohol in him to kill 3 people. I think he had 12 vodka cocktails within the space of, 15 hours. So he didn't get up in the morning, and the road manager found him. Just overdid it. I mean, they all overdid everything. I mean, Jimmy was a heroin addict for a long time. And when they did In Through the Outdoor, you'll notice for the first time, there's not a single song on there. I mean, Jimmy either wrote or co-wrote just about every song. On that album, there's songs written by Plant and John Paul Jones. Another song. There's a couple of songs without Jimmy, and that's because they went to record the album and Jimmy didn't show up because he was, whacked out on heroin.
Yeah, in the evening, they took parts of something he was working on for the Death Wish soundtrack, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yes. So anyway, the first song, All of My Love, which is a great song. There's no Jimmy Page in that at all. It's all Plant and John Paul Jones.
How soon after did the surviving members announce Zeppelin's no more?
It was 2 weeks because the tour was coming up. And they already said, what are we going to do? Go out and get Kenny Jones to play drums? I mean, that's ridiculous. Nobody could do what Zeppelin did. I mean, what Bonham did. So we're not going to continue they sort of left it open-ended. We can no longer continue as we were. So that left the open possibility, which is why they were able to play Live Aid and also the Atlantic Records 40th anniversary concert and using Jason Bonham.
Yeah, the '85 show with Phil Collins and Tony Thompson.
Right.
There were the one-off performances. Yeah, where
Yeah,
do
I
you
was there.
were
I
you
was
at
there.
that? Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that? No official Zeppelin reunion tour ever happened. Is it best that they never got back together for
Yeah,
nostalgia type
I don't,
tours?
although Jimmy would like to. In fact, Chris Squire from Yes, was a very good friend of mine, was at a show looking for a John Anderson sound-alike when John quit the band. And he ran into, and Jimmy was like a neighbor of Chris's in Surrey, England, and lived nearby. And he spots Page and he goes, I guess you're here for the same reason I am, huh? Looking for a singer. And Jimmy admitted, yeah, Robert doesn't want to do it, but I really want to. Also, I revealed that there were auditions with Steven Tyler,
Yeah,
which I never saw reported anywhere.
Sammy Hagar said that he was approached about it.
He might have been, but Tyler actually flew over to England and took his road manager, was one of his best friends, Henry Smith, with him. And he's the one that told me about it because it was never really officially reported. But they did 2 days worth of rehearsals, and just didn't feel right. So,
And there was also Miles Kennedy
yeah, that was more
from Alter Bridge.
that was the press generated that. I mean, can you see Zeppelin going out with Miles Kennedy? I mean, come on. Only because he sounded a little bit like Plant. But, whenever I was at the Classic Rock Awards in England one year, and Jimmy was there getting an award for Zeppelin, and Ian Anderson walked over to Jimmy, wanted to ask him a question. He says, "No, I'm not going to ask you, if you're going to go out again and get a new singer." He goes, "Well, I'd like to, but it's not up to me. You got to ask Robert."
Wow. See that I always got that feeling too that Jimmy wanted to do it but
Sure.
Robert, he was really the integrity of that, what they did with John Bonham is really important to him.
Robert didn't even do any Zeppelin songs on his first solo tour.
Mm.
Nothing.
And even the Page Plant stuff, it was with that idea that we're not going to just go out there and play these songs exactly the same way. We're going to do something different.
Yeah, they played a couple of Zeppelin songs in that, and Coverdale was considered as a lead singer too.
What did you think of Coverdale Page? Yeah, what did you think of that?
I got to be honest with you, I'm not that familiar because I never got into the album.
Yeah,
It was Coverdale, okay, Deep Purple, fine, but I really liked the original Deep Purple, so I wasn't a big fan of the latter day Deep Purple albums. And Jimmy's is Jimmy, so they only toured Japan. They never toured in America.
what about the Firm? You were a fan of the Firm?
That was different. Paul Rogers is probably, many said, the best rock singer of all time. So nobody's going to knock that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was on the label anyway. And Jimmy just said, but before that, there's the XYZ story.
Oh yeah,
Which again, I got from Chris Squire. Chris had run into Jimmy at a Christmas party. And Jimmy said, and Jimmy hadn't touched his guitar in a year and a half. He said, I'd really like to play some guitar. Can I come over to your house and we'll just jam? Chris said, sure, anytime you want. He said, in fact, I got Alan White's coming over. Why don't you come next week and we'll hang out? And so they started playing, and they actually came up with 4 songs, which didn't really appear anywhere, although I understand now they actually may release them. I have copies of them. One song ended up changed around a little bit as a Yes song, was on the Magnification album, and another was on the second Firm album. But they decided to call the band XYZ, Zeppelin, yes. And Chris told me there were a couple of reasons it didn't happen. One of the other ones was he said, I had to go up to Peter Grant's house to tell him about it because he still managed Jimmy. He said, so I went up to Peter Grant's house, and all we did was argue for 24 hours because Peter Grant said, well, I don't like the name XYZ. I don't like yes coming before Zeppelin. And Chris said, well, but Peter, that's how the alphabet
Right.
goes. XYZ. Natural name for the band. He says, no,
ZXY.
I don't like it. Zeppelin's got to be first.
Wow.
I mean, just crazy stuff like that. So it never happened. But
Yeah, that's one of those. That's one of those projects Zeppelin fans talk about. That, boy, what could have become of that? What do you think of Robert's solo career?
I think a couple of his albums are really good. I particularly like the first two. And he's always got great songs on each one of them. And he's always changing styles. The album he did with, what's her name? I forget her name.
Oh, Alison Krauss.
Yeah, Alison
Yeah,
Krauss.
yeah.
He's always looking to do something different. So
You're right, and that's what I respect about him. And
yeah.
he's
Now I will tell you, before we finish, I'll tell you something that's pretty interesting. I interviewed the chairman of Atlantic Records, Craig Kalman. He's in the book. Now, Craig's a huge Zeppelin fan also. Now, Zeppelin, as you know, wouldn't allow singles to be released. But during their lifetime, Atlantic was a label in America, and they licensed their stuff to 30 countries around the world. And a lot of these countries decided to put singles out in picture sleeves, and they had to send it to New York to get approved. And of course, Craig pulled them off the market. I mean, Atlantic pulled them off the market or destroyed them or whatever. But Craig was able to get a copy of each picture sleeve, and he has them up on the wall in his office. And I have it in the book because no one's ever seen them. All these singles from different countries that were going to be released that were never allowed to be released. Now, he also told me something else. I said, well, is there anything left, in the archives? He goes, no. He said, but here's what I think is going to happen. This is what we're talking about. And this interview with him was like about a year ago. He said, we are discussing the possibility of putting out board tapes of various live shows, the way Springsteen does.
right.
So you may very well see a couple of board tapes come out as albums. They're still mulling over it. And I think it'll eventually happen, but not immediately. Maybe after Jimmy passes away or something. I don't know. But that's how the thirst for Zeppelin stuff is. You can probably put out anything, as long as it was decent. And they never really did a bad show.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, click on the logo. It'll take you right to the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. A ton of amazing interviews in the book. Paige Plant, John Paul Jones, but also Eddie Kramer, Cameron Crowe, you mentioned. Jason Bonham's in there, Joe Perry, Alice Cooper, and Nancy Wilson of Heart.
In the new one, I got Geezer Butler.
Geezer Butler from
Black
Sabbath.
Who said that they did a jam session, Robert and John Paul Jones and Tony and him, and they actually recorded some songs, and he refers to it as the Black Zeppelin album. And he says, I told the engineer not to record anything while we're doing this, but of course, that's a signal to definitely record it. He said, somebody's got it, and it will eventually leak out. So
Man.
the official word is, because people have said, well, I've heard that story, but no, he said, well, it did happen, but nobody knows. I don't know. I don't have it unless it's in some warehouse, but I don't know anybody else. The engineer that recorded it may have it, but it's never been leaked. So that's out there too.
Ian Anderson's in the book too. Yeah, John Paul Jones is a guy, he doesn't seem to age. He looks the same.
Yeah. And actually, I like his first two solo albums.
I was going to ask you about that too. Yeah.
I love them. The first one's sort of an instrumental album, like a new age. It's just really good. The second one, he got a vocalist and has some songs on it. but the first one I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, I got to listen to that. I have Thunder Chief.
Yeah, the first one's much better.
That was like early
And
2000s.
it was on Robert Fripp's label, EG. So it didn't really get wide. He was a friend of Fripp's, and John Paul Jones getting a record deal, he didn't want to go through that. So he was playing. Robert Fripp came by, and Fripp said, "Hey, I'll tell you what, we have a label, EG Records, distributed. It's really distributed by Atlantic. Roxy Music is on it. We're on it. We'll put the record out because they made it very cheap, didn't cost a lot."
Yeah, and then
So-
he worked with Cinderella on Heartbreak Station. I don't know if he produced it, but he's playing
No,
on
no,
those
he worked
tracks.
on one song.
Okay.
He also worked on a couple of songs with Heart, um, and he worked with the Foo Fighters, which is how them crooked vultures came about.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
But otherwise, John Paul Jones has a wife and kids, and is very happy to. In fact, his real wish was when Zeppelin was over, he wanted to be a choir master at a church.
Wow. That
He
makes
didn't need the
sense.
money. I mean, he played on sessions like Jimmy. He got a lot of fees. I mean, he arranged, and like "She Comes in Colors" on the Stones album. He arranged
Did he
that.
really? Wow.
Yeah, which is a great arrangement. He did a lot of other stuff too. He arranged a lot of the Donovan stuff, Sunshine Superman. Um, and actually, Jimmy plays guitar on that. So the two of them had worked together on numerous sessions. Um,
He's just so humble and quiet. You just don't know.
yeah, you're right. And he very seldom gave interviews. I was able to get an interview, obviously, when he was doing the solo albums, but as a member of Led Zeppelin, I was very friendly with Scott Muni. And Scott was one of the few people that interviewed everybody because nobody's going to turn him
For
down.
those who may not know, Scottso, right? Scott Muni, the
Yeah,
famous DJ from New York.
Scott. So I worked with him for several years on his syndicated show, Ticket to Ride, which is a weekly Beatles show. So we became very close, and he gave me all his interviews.
Wow.
Which was
So
amazing.
so tell us about the updated edition now. People can get it on Amazon and all the usual places.
It's also Hachette, my publishers. They're the third largest publisher in the world. So the book is in stores. It's in Barnes and Noble. In fact, I'm doing a book signing next week at the Barnes and Noble in my neighborhood. I've also visited the other two Barnes and Nobles in the area. I live in Florida.
I was going to ask Florida. Okay.
Yeah, and they all have it. So you can walk into Barnes and Noble if they have one or two copies and they got to reorder. Or the easiest thing is and I think Amazon has it on sale right now,
Okay.
15% off or something like that.
Get the Let Out, how Led Zeppelin became the biggest band in the world. Look for it. I'll put a link to the Amazon
Okay.
copy there. And yeah, it's.
I hope I got, gave you some news you can use. The thing about the board tapes and the Black Zeppelin and all that stuff has never really been publicized anywhere. The final chapter of the book is an interview with Mark Andes. Mark Andes is the only surviving member of Spirit. He was in Firefall and he played with Heart for 10 years. So when the estate of Randy California decided to go ahead with the lawsuit for Stairway to Heaven, they asked Mark Andes to join the suit to make it more official. So no one has spoken to him since that suit was settled. And I don't know if you know how it got settled. I'll be glad to tell you. It was never really explained. But I called Mark. He hadn't given an interview to anybody. And I said, "Would you give me an interview for this book?" He said, "Okay." So what happened, Zeppelin won. The judge ruled in their favor. But it got appealed, which was amazing. They appealed it. So they had to go back to court. And Spirit's attorneys said, "Judge, all you have to do is play the first 30 seconds of Stairway to Heaven, the first 30 seconds of Taurus by Spirit, play it for the jury. There's no question they're identical. No question. If you've ever heard Taurus, you'll be blown away. It's only the first part of the song, but still."
It's been a long time since I played it, but I remember when I played it, you can hear it.
And anyway, the judge said, "No, I can't do that." What do you mean you can't do it? The jury will know in 2 seconds. Can't do it. He said, "What do you mean you can't do it?" He said, "Well, Zeppelin didn't do demos or anything. They copyrighted their material, by folios, like written down, like the things you buy at music stores to practice guitar, you get songs. So there were no tapes. So he said, because of that, it was copyrighted as a folio. I can give the jury a copy of each song written out, and they can decide. I think lawyer said, "Are you kidding? You think this jury is going to be able to look at two pieces of paper and know it sounds alike?" So they lost the appeal. They should have won.
Well, I remember Rolling Stone covered it. That was pretty well covered at that time.
I was actually hired as an expert witness in the case.
Really?
Yeah, so I got to follow it pretty closely. That's how I know the ending, what happened.
Well, and it also explains because it just kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But, your explanation is makes sense.
Mark told me that they always talked about Zeppelin ripped that off from us. And they said the same thing. What are we going to do? Sue them? Can't afford, we don't have the money to sue them. They got lawyers up the wazoo. So that's what happened. And no one's ever interviewed Mark. He's in the book towards the end. And so I got some real key interviews. I think that's a key interview. The Nicky Hopkins interview is great. There's a few others where you just find out stuff that no one, Chris Squire tells the whole story of XYZ, and he was part of it. So I tried to get as close to the source for these stories as I could. And that's why I'm proud of the book. Like I said, I didn't write, history. It's not a history of Zeppelin. It's why Zeppelin is the biggest band in the world, because these people say so.
Yep. And beautifully laid out, put together, the photos, the whole thing. So it's,
yeah. Anybody wants to get a hold of me, my website is Rock and Roll for Grownups.
Rock and Roll for Grownups. Okay.
.com. That's rock, the letter N, roll, the number 4, grownups.com. And you can see all my stuff there. You can send me notes, whatever, and I'll answer them.
Denny Somach, thanks so much. Get the Let Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World. Pick up your copy of the latest edition. There it is right there.
With a foreword by Carmine Appice, who was John Bonham's mentor. It's great. I appreciate you having me on. I know your show, you have a lot of people with authors, so this was a great venue for me, and I'm glad I was able to do it.
No, I'm glad too. We were kind of going back and forth for a while on this, and I'm glad we made it happen. So thank you so much, Denny. This was great, man.
You're welcome, and it was great meeting you.
That's it. It's in the books.